Welcome back to American History Gazette. This is the third installment of our DC trip, our DC series. And today we're going to Arlington National Cemetery. Now, last September, I did go to Arlington for the first time, and it was my absolute favorite spot in the entire city. It is extremely beautiful. It is very somber, very profound, stretches on and on as far as the eye can see of rolling hills and white headstones, and it just fills you with so much pride as an American to see all of these people who fought for their country and defended our freedoms. But you can't actually film in a vlog style while you're there or any kind of interview, so I won't be able to talk to him on camera. But we will get some B roll, and I'm going to have to voice that over later. But I'm extremely excited. So let's get right into it. This is the grave of Wallace Randolph, who was an artillery commander in the Civil War, ending his career as a major general and the first U.S. Army Chief of Artillery. He said he spent most of his life behind a cannon, so he wanted to be laid to rest under one. This is the James Tanner Amphitheater, or Old Amphitheater, and was the site of the first Memorial Day ceremony held at Arlington on May 30th, 1868. In 1873, on the 5th anniversary of the first Memorial Day celebrations, a permanent amphitheater was built on the site of the first ceremony. On May 30th, 2014, as part of the ceremony's 150th anniversary celebration, Arlington renamed the old amphitheater in honor of James Tanner. Tanner, a corporal in the 87th New York Volunteer Infantry during the Civil War, suffered a gruesome wound at the Second Battle of Bull Run in August 1862, which resulted in the loss of both legs. After the war, this wounded warrior became a stenographer and was present at both Abraham Lincoln's deathbed and during the trial of the Lincoln conspirators. He was an advocate for veterans' rights and served for a time as the Commissioner of Pensions, and later became the Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Army of the Republic. Tanner is now buried a few yards from the structure that bears his name. This is the Tomb of the Civil War Unknowns, which is the original and lesser known of the two Tomb of the Unknowns. The monument, dedicated in September 1866, stands atop a masonry vault containing the remains of 2,111 soldiers gathered from the fields of Bull Run and the route to the Rappahannock River. The remains were found scattered across the battlefields or in trenches within an approximately 25-mile radius of Washington, D.C. Nearly 1,800 remains came from Bull Run alone. The mass carnage of the Civil War had quickly overwhelmed the capacity of existing cemeteries, especially in Northern Virginia, where many of the war's early battles were fought. As Union officials looked for a solution to this problem, U.S. Army Quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs proposed that the Arlington House property, which the U.S. Army had occupied since May 1861, could be used as burial ground. This was the first memorial at Arlington to be dedicated to soldiers who had died in battle and whose remains could not be identified. The vault likely contains the remains of Confederate soldiers as well as U.S. Army troops. Here are some nice views atop the hill at the foot of the Arlington House. Here is the flag out front of the house, which is put at half-mast during funerals and burials. There are upwards of 20 to 30 burials a day at Arlington, so this flag is at half-mast most of the time. Here we are entering the Arlington House, the former residence of Robert E. Lee. Constructed between 1802 and 1818, Arlington House was the nation's first memorial to George Washington. In 1778, John Parke Custis, the son of Martha Washington and her first husband, Daniel Parke Custis, purchased 1,100 acres of land in northern Virginia on rolling hills overlooking Washington, D.C. In 1802, John Parke Custis' son, George Washington Parke Custis, and the first president's adopted grandson, inherited the property then known as Mount Washington. Custis decided to construct a Greek Revival-style mansion there as his home and a place to display his large collection of George Washington heirlooms and memorabilia such as furniture, silver, china, and family portraits. The estate was a working plantation, and the mansion, called Arlington House, was built by enslaved African Americans. George Washington Parke Custis and his wife, Mary Lee Fitzhugh, lived at Arlington House until their deaths in 1857 and 1853, respectively. The Custis' only child, Mary Anna Randolph Custis, married her childhood friend and distant cousin Robert E. Lee in June 1831. A West Point graduate and the son of a three-term Virginia governor, Robert E. Lee commanded the Confederate Army during the Civil War. The Lees inherited the Custis estate in 1857, including 196 enslaved persons who lived and worked on the plantation. After Virginia seceded from the United States on May 24, 1861, the Lees left Arlington House never to return. The U.S. Army then occupied their estate, located on strategic high ground across from the nation's capital, as a camp and headquarters. U.S. troops constructed forts on the property, including Fort Whipple and Fort McPherson. Because Mrs. Lee failed to pay taxes in person, as then required by the law, the federal government confiscated the estate, purchasing it on January 11, 1864, for government use for war, military, charitable, and educational purposes. This is the USS Maine Memorial, which overlooks the remains of 230 service members who died when the battleship exploded off the coast of Havana, Cuba on February 15, 1898. As Cubans were fighting for independence from Spanish colonial rule, President William McKinley ordered the Maine to Cuba to protect U.S. political and economic interests on the nearby island. On the night of February 15th, an explosion in Havana Harbor tore through the ship's hull, killing more than 260 sailors on board. 102 members of the crew survived. Historians are still unsure what caused the Maine's explosion, but popular sentiment at the time, encouraged by sensational journalism, blamed the disaster on the Spanish. Fueled by public outrage over the Maine's destruction, as well as concern for the Cuban rebels and opposition to European colonization of the Americas, on April 25, 1898, the United States declared war against Spain. Remember the Maine became pro-war American signature rallying cry. This is a memorial to the USS Monitor, a Union ironclad warship which took part in the first ever ironclad-on-ironclad naval battle with the CSS Virginia. Beneath this unassuming stone marker is the final resting place of two unknown sailors from the Union ironclad warship. Their journey from the Monitor wreck site off of North Carolina to Arlington spanned a century and a half, and they traveled halfway across the globe before finally being laid to rest here. 16 names are on the face of the memorial, 16 men who volunteered to serve in an experimental vessel at a time when the very fabric of our nation was in peril. This is the much larger and newer Memorial Amphitheater. The Memorial Amphitheater was dedicated on May 15, 1920. While Memorial Day ceremonies are held throughout the United States, many consider the services at Memorial Amphitheater to be the nation's official ceremony honoring American service members. The President of the United States traditionally gives an address during Memorial Day ceremonies at the amphitheater. Some 5,000 visitors attend each of the three major annual memorial services in the amphitheater, which take place on Easter, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day. This is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It is a monument dedicated to American service members who have died without their remains being identified. Established in 1921, the tomb originally entombed an unknown soldier from World War I and has since been joined by unknowns from World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, although the Vietnam War unknown was later identified and disinterred. The tomb symbolizes the sacrifice of all unidentified soldiers and serves as a poignant reminder of the cost of war. The changing of the guard is a solemn and precise ceremony performed by the Tomb Guard, an elite group of soldiers from the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment known as the Old Guard. This ritual, which takes place every hour on the hour and every half hour during summer months, involves a meticulous routine of inspection and ceremonial steps, reflecting the utmost respect and honor for the fallen. There is a continuous presence of the Guard 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This is the flag that covered the casket of the World War II unknown during his funeral service, and this is the one for the Korean War. And this is the flag of the Vietnam War unknown funeral. This is the Space Shuttle Columbia Memorial. On February 1, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia was headed home after a 16-day scientific mission, its 28th venture into space. As Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere, it suddenly burst into flames, killing all 7 crew members. This is the Iranian Rescue Mission Memorial. This memorial commemorates the role of U.S. service members during a hostage crisis that took place amidst the Iranian Revolution of 1979. In January 1979, Iranian leader Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi fled into exile after a year of escalating protests. Iran's new leader declared the country an Islamic republic, and his fundamentalist regime encouraged anti-American sentiment. On November 4, 1979, a group of several hundred Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 66 of its employees hostage. The captors released women and African American hostages during the next 2 weeks, but 53 Americans remained captive. By the spring of 1980, the diplomatic negotiations had reached a stalemate, and President Jimmy Carter authorized a secret military operation to begin on April 24th to rescue the remaining hostages. During the mission preparations, however, a helicopter collided with a transport plane, killing 8 American service personnel. The rescue mission was aborted. Iran did not release the hostages until January 20th, 1981, day 444 of their captivity, and the day of President Ronald Reagan's inauguration. This is the Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial. On January 28, 1968, Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after takeoff, killing all 7 crew members, including high school teacher Krista McAuliffe, who had been selected from among more than 11,000 applicants to become the first teacher in space. It took nearly 2 months to recover the remains from the ocean floor, about 18 miles off the shore of Cape Canaveral, Florida. On May 20th, 1986, the commingled cremated remains of the 7 Challenger astronauts were buried at Arlington National Cemetery. These are some cannons from the Spanish-American War, which is pretty cool. This is the Spanish-American War Memorial. In 1898, rebels in Cuba, then a colony of Spain, were fighting for independence from Spanish rule. During the conflict, President William McKinley ordered warships to Cuba to protect U.S. political and economic interests on the nearby island. On February 15, 1898, an explosion in Havana Harbor blasted through the USS Maine, killing more than 260 sailors on board. Fueled by public outrage over the Maine's destruction, as well as concern for the Cuban rebels and opposition to European colonization of the Americas, on April 25, 1898, the United States declared war against Spain. The war did not last long. Within months, the U.S. Army had seized control of strategic Cuban territory, such as San Juan Heights, where the Rough Riders made their famous cavalry charge. The U.S. Navy blockaded Cuba and destroyed Spanish squadrons in the Pacific. On August 12, 1898, Spain effectively surrendered, and the U.S. and Spain signed a peace treaty on December 10, 1898. The treaty ended Spanish rule in Cuba, but made the island, while nominally independent, a U.S. protectorate. This is the headstone of Chief Justice Earl Warren. Warren served as the 30th governor of California from 1943 to 1953 and as the 14th Chief Justice of the United States from 1953 to 1969. This is the Spanish-American War Nurses Memorial. The Spanish-American War was the first U.S. war in which nurses comprised a dedicated quasi-military unit and the first time in U.S. history that nurses were fully accepted in military hospitals. Although no nurses were killed in combat, 153 died from diseases during the war. This is the Battle of the Bulge Memorial. The Battle of the Bulge, described by Winston Churchill as undoubtedly the greatest American battle of World War II, took place in the Ardennes Forest region of Belgium and Luxembourg from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. The last major German counteroffensive on the Western Front, it ended in victory for the Allied forces under the command of General Dwight Eisenhower, but at great cost. Soldiers fought in brutal winter conditions, and the U.S. Army lost approximately 19,000 men and suffered some 75,000 total casualties in what would become the United States' deadliest single World War II battle. This is the Rough Riders Memorial. During the Spanish-American War, future President Teddy Roosevelt commanded the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, popularly known as the Rough Riders. Perhaps the best-known cavalry unit in U.S. history, the Rough Riders became legendary after their charge up Cuban's San Juan Hill on July 1, 1898, during one of the most decisive and bloodiest battles of the war. These cowboy soldiers gained additional fame thanks to Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, an enormously popular theatrical production that toured the United States and Europe at the turn of the 20th century. Mere months before his assassination, President John F. Kennedy stood here at this spot during a visit to Arlington and remarked that he could live with this view for the rest of his life. This remark led to his eventual burial and final resting place just at the foot of the hill there. And this is JFK's final resting place alongside Jackie Kennedy. Kennedy is one of only 2 presidents buried at Arlington. At the time of Kennedy's death, many believed that he would be buried in Brookline, Massachusetts, where he was born and raised. However, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy wanted her husband's gravesite to be widely accessible to the American public. At 3 p.m. on November 25, 1963, the state funeral of President Kennedy began. 50 Navy and Air Force jets flew overhead, followed by Air Force One, which dipped its wing in a final tribute. Millions of Americans watched live coverage of the funeral on television, leading to an unprecedented increase in demand for burials at Arlington National Cemetery. An eternal flame, lit by Mrs. Kennedy, burns from the center of a 5-foot circular granite stone at the head of the grave. This is his brother, Robert F. Kennedy's final resting place nearby. Robert F. Kennedy was a World War II U.S. Navy veteran who served as Attorney General, Senator, and 1968 Democratic presidential candidate and was shot in Los Angeles on June 5, 1968, shortly after winning the California Democratic primary. He died the next morning. This is the final resting place of another Kennedy brother, Ted Kennedy. Edward Kennedy was an American lawyer and politician who served as a United States Senator from Massachusetts. This is the Marine Corps War Memorial, based on an iconic image of the second flag raising on the island of Iwo Jima during World War II. The U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial is dedicated to the Marine dead of all wars and their comrades of other services who fell fighting beside them. So that wraps up our Arlington National Cemetery video. That was absolutely amazing. We saw so much of Arlington today because we were able to drive around and we had the ability to cover a lot more ground than you would walking. So we were able to reach the outer stretches of the cemetery where a lot of those cool memorials are that sometimes people don't get to see. And I'm really glad we got to see those. But Arlington is such a beautiful, somber, and profound place to visit. It fills you with so much pride as an American to visit the cemetery and to see the rows and rows and rows of white headstones, hundreds and thousands of them, of men and women who served your country and gave their lives for our country and for our freedom. It's very inspiring to see. And I think every American, I've said this in my other DC videos, but I think every American really needs to come out to DC at least once in their life to see these places and to appreciate and think about what really is behind all of this and the reason why all of these places are here, especially with Arlington, all the men and women who have served and died for our freedom. It's very inspiring, very profound stuff. But if you like the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button below. Make sure to check out our podcast with Allison, which will be linked down in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on our next adventure.